Need your daily fix on mixed martial arts?
We're going to kind of recap Bellator 155 from UFC 198.
Who's who?
Kind of a controversial decision.
And who's not?
I couldn't figure out why, and then it hit me.
Well, don't you fret, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your daily dose of MMA podcasts. Everything from the UFC, Bellator Fighting Championship, Extreme Cage Fighting, Invicta Fighting Championship, and so much more. Join us as we talk about some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts. We've got you covered here on Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Mixed Martial Art Podcast. I'm your host, Tate, and we are just coming off of a really, really fun weekend. That was UFC 201, and we also had Invicta 18. And man, UFC 201 was definitely a fun group of fights that actually turned out to be a lot better than I thought it was going to be. When I first saw the card, the one fight I was excited about was the main event, Tyron Woodley versus Robbie Lawler, and I gave you guys my predictions for that right out the gate. I was leaning toward Tyron Woodley. I mean, not leaning. I was actually taking with Tyron Woodley, and you can go back and look at that. And even though Robbie Lawler has been nothing but a top-notch champion. But I was taking I was taking Tyron Woodley, and a lot of friends and a lot of people around here thought I was crazy. But when the fight actually happened, which we're going to talk about in a few seconds, it turned out exactly the way I kind of thought it would go. So we're going to talk about the fight, the main event. We're going to talk about some of the other great cards from the Rose Namajunas fight with Karolina Kowalkiewicz. We're going to talk about the Matt Brown and Jake Ellenberger fight. And then we're going to also talk about some of the other fights on this card, because this card was not short on action. And then we're also going to touch on that Invicta 18 card that went on this weekend, which was just so much fun. I enjoy watching Invicta. I love seeing some of the up and coming top-notch female MMA fighters. So this was definitely a card to really learn about who's the top fighters that's coming up in the Invicta world. So when we come back, we're going to touch on the fights, and we'll be back shortly.
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now, don't bother, what's hot on Netflix, and everything in between. That's GSMCpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, we're back. And as I was just talking about what we're going to be covering here, the first fight we're going to talk about is the main event from UFC 201. And that was the champ Robbie Lawler versus Tyron Woodley. And as I talked about beforehand, I was one of the few people that actually took Tyron to win this fight, and he did in spectacular fashion. But I wasn't surprised not because of anything that I was going to say about Robbie Lawler, but it was more about what Tyron Woodley brought to the game. And that is this. When you look at the fight and you say, Robbie Lawler's that guy who's that blood and guts champion who is just such a strong, tough fighter. Robbie Lawler, he'll fight anyone. He'll stand there. He'll bang toe to toe. And that works out well against Carlos Condit and a lot of the other fighters. But when you put him in the ring with someone like Tyron Woodley, who, number one, is actually, a teammate of his, who's actually sparred with him, who actually knows what Robbie Lawler can do. But the other thing is, Robbie Lawler starts out slow and Tyron Woodley starts out fast. And the big problem is, if Robbie Lawler started off slow, I thought that Tyron Woodley would catch him and put him out. And that's exactly what happened. I don't even think that Robbie Lawler even had a chance to land a shot. By the time they really got going and that shot landed, it was over so fast. It was kind of sad to see Robbie lose the title the way he did, because he's been nothing but a great champion. But you cannot whatsoever start slow with Tyron Woodley. The key to beating Tyron Woodley, as if you go back to what I said before when you were talking about the keys to this fight, it was not get taken down, not get caught early, take him to deep water. And and if you didn't do that, you were in for a long or a very short night. And that's exactly what happened. He caught him. When Robbie got hit, Robbie was out. As a matter of fact, Robbie tried to grab the referee when he was out and woke up. He kind of grabbed the referee like he was going to wrestle the referee. Then he fell right back down again. He was done. That was, there was no question about that this fight was done. Now, with that being said, and now when you look at this and you say, just amazing, and I was very happy for him. But the first thing that popped in my mind was, okay, now is it going to be Robbie Lawler's going to get a rematch, or is it going to be Wonder Boy? And the way Tyron Woodley had taken out Robbie Lawler, I was like, okay, there's no rematch there. That's not going to be an immediate rematch kind of a fight. So it's going to be Wonder Boy. And then you go in, and they're doing the interview, and it's on Fox Sports. And they have Wonder Boy in the studio, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say. And Wonder Boy, a classy guy. He really is such a classy guy. But he asked the question, and before the fight, Wonder Boy kept talking about how much he wanted to fight Robbie Lawler and how he matched up well. So after the fight, Wonder Boy congratulated Tyron Woodley. And he talked about how he had this look in his eye and how he's a different man, and, how he's fresh. And is there a chance that they'll be able to mix it up at one of the upcoming UFC event? And Tyron Woodley let him have it with both barrels. He did it in a classy way. He looked at him and he said, "You know what? From everything I've been hearing, you've been talking about how much you want Robbie Lawler. Well, you can go ahead and go get Robbie Lawler. He's available." And he announced that he wanted Diaz or he wanted GSP. And he did it so classic. It was just such a classic move that he pretty much left Wonder Boy just shocked. And and Wonder Boy, Wonder Boy's a classy guy. So he held it together. But you could see that, like Tyron had just crushed his dream, and I personally think, and I'll go right out and say this, I think the best fighter in the welterweight division is Wonder Boy, but I agree with Tyron Woodley on what he was doing, and in the fight world, if you're Tyron Woodley, there's not a lot of big money opportunities. And he's been doing this a long, long time. And now he's in the driver's seat. And I don't blame him for wanting to get a big payday. Why jump into a fight with a guy like Wonder Boy, who's a guy who can beat him? Wonder Boy has that ability to beat him. But he can go in and he can fight Diaz. And I think he crushed Diaz. But that fight would pay off really well. A fight with George St. Pierre would pay off well. If you're going to risk, get paid first, then go back to Wonder Boy. So I understood why he was doing it. I think it's a smart business decision on his part. I think a lot of people think that he's avoiding fighting Wonder Boy. I don't think of him as being afraid to fight Wonder Boy. I just look at it as a guy who is a very intelligent fighter who knows that at age, I believe he's age 34, you don't have a lot more opportunities to be in the driver's seat. And so he's going to make the most of it. And so with him saying that he wants Diaz or George St. Pierre, I think is smart. Diaz is just becoming, I think yesterday he became eligible to fight again. He's no longer suspended. So it was the perfect time to make that announcement. And with Diaz isn't going to turn that down. Diaz would take that fight in a heartbeat. Now, the question is, will the UFC put that fight together? Diaz is coming off of an extended suspension, and he hasn't won in a very long time. Diaz puts butts in the seats, but I think that is not gonna. That fight's not gonna happen. I don't think you can't have a guy who's coming off of a long suspension, a couple of losses, going right on in and fighting for the title, even though he is a marquee name. I think if Tyron Woodley's gonna get a big payday, it has to be George St. Pierre. This is the fight I would like to see because George St. Pierre, he is in my opinion, the greatest welterweight champion of all time. He never lost the welterweight title. It sets up for the perfect match. You know, Tyron Woodley and GSP, they actually do a lot of the same things, where they're both solid wrestlers. They're both great, tacticians. They both have a lot of great skills. The difference is, I think with that fight is, I think George St. Pierre is a lot more technical. I think Woodley would be a better wrestler, a slightly better wrestler. But it's still, I don't trust anyone to be in the ring with Tyron Woodley if you have to survive the first round and a half. And I think George St. Pierre's that guy who comes in the fight, he's very cerebral. I think he would know that. I think he would fight very cautiously. And I think he would put together a game plan that would be very intriguing. I don't know who would win in that fight. That'd be very interesting, especially when you're talking about ring rust and the fact that Tyron Woodley can knock anyone out at any time. That would be a really interesting situation there. Now, the next question I have is, what happens with Robbie Lawler? Robbie Lawler's been a great champion. He's taken on everyone. But the way he lost, he doesn't, he's not in line for a title shot. He's going to have to fight again. So do you if you put together the Diaz Woodley fight, or you put together the Diaz, or you put the George St. Pierre Tyron Woodley fight, does that mean that you actually really do put Wonder Boy and Robbie Lawler together? And if you're Wonder Boy, why would you take that fight? I wouldn't take that fight. It's too dangerous of a fight, and there's no upside to it. If I'm Wonder Boy, I sit back and I wait. Because I'm not fighting Robbie Lawler for nothing unless it's a title. Robbie Lawler is so tough. He's been nothing but a great champion, and Robbie Lawler can beat the crap out of you. So no, I would not. If I was him, if I was Wonder Boy, I wouldn't take that fight. So I think you kind of, if that fight doesn't go off, it puts Robbie in kind of a weird place as well, where Robbie's going to have to, and it may not be that bad. Robbie may have to wait for a big fight And I think that's a good thing. Robbie's been in a lot of wars. This is the first fight in, I think, like 3 that's not like fight of year candidate, where he's taken so much punishment. I would like to see Robbie Lawler take 8-9 months off and come back when the smoke clears, refreshed and healed up. I would like to see him take some time off. He was a classy guy. He was very classy with the loss. He openly admitted he got caught. He was nothing but respectful. So that's one thing I do tip my hat to him on. Now, that concludes our take on the main event. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk about the co-main event and some of the other fights on this card, because the co-main event, I think, shocked a lot of people. I think everyone was expecting Rose Namajunas to come in and really showcase herself and get her gear up for a Rose, title run or title match, but with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. But something else happened, and we're going to talk about that when we come right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, we're back, and we just got done breaking down the main event from UFC 201, where we're talking about where Tyron Woodley won the title by knocking out Robbie Lawler, who has been a long-time champion. And now we're going to go into the co-main event, which was a very, very interesting fight as well, which put, one of the fighters who could have been the strawweight champion right from the beginning, and that was Rose Namajunas. Rose went into the Ultimate Fighter, and she was a strong competitor. She did a really good job. She took it all the way to the finals, and she ended up losing to Carlos Esparza, who became the new strawweight champion. Everyone knows how that went, where Carla ended up getting in the ring with Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who is just a dynamo. That's the best word I can think of. All the champions. Every time a champion's come up for a fight, they've all lost recently. There's been so many champions that keep falling, except for one. Joanna Jędrzejczyk. She went into the International Fight Week. She defended her title against probably her toughest, stiffest competition, and she came out smelling like roses. And so she has been that professional who has defended her title through adversity and has done a great job. So this fight here between Rose Namajunas and Karolina Kowalkiewicz was actually setting up for the winner of this fight gets to take on Joanna for the strawweight title. And I had this as a Rose fight. I thought I went back and I watched all. I mean, from the beginning, every one of Karolina Kowalkiewicz's fights. And I kept looking at her, and I kept thinking, like, I just don't see any way possible that she can actually win. I thought Rose was going to be just, too skilled, too rough on the ground, and was going to be just too much for her. Ladies and gentlemen, I was wrong. Man, when I watched that fight, in the first round, it went through, and, it was a good fight. And Rose's her skills, as far as her stand-up skills, was really, really was looking good. I was very fascinated about how things were going. And then the second round, it actually started happening in the first round, where I started noticing that, in the clinch, Karolina would actually start catching Rose, and I started noticing that she was catching Rose with like knees and elbows. And then round 2 kind of went into play. And I'm watching the fight, and Rose would look good on the outside, but whenever the clinch would happen, Karolina would just start nailing her with a bunch of knees, a bunch of elbows, a lot of dirty boxing. And she started breaking Rose down. And also the other thing I noticed, which I was a little surprised about, is how different in size they were. Karolina Kowalkiewicz was a much bigger, stronger fighter, and she could hold that clinch where Rose couldn't get away, and then the knees kept coming in, and they were breaking her down. The elbows were cracking Rose, and, I was a little surprised, because round 1, I gave it very, very close round to Rose. Round 2 was clearly Karolina Kowalkiewicz. And then round 3, it was just more of the same. The clinch would happen. The Muay Thai would kick in. The dirty boxing would kick in. And Rose was just getting nailed with knees and elbows and shots, one after the next one after the next one. And the fact of the matter is that I actually thought there's no way that Rose would lose this fight. By the beginning of the third round, I was like, there's no way that Rose can win this fight. It was obvious that Karolina was a much bigger, much stronger fighter, and that Rose had no answer for the dirty boxing. It was kind of like watching a strawweight fight an atomweight. They didn't look like they were in the same division. It was just like there was a huge difference there. In the end, Rose, it was just more than Rose could handle, and we ended up with the decision came down, and I was actually a little surprised by the decision as well, because I could have easily made this, it was so close that I could have easily made this a 3 rounds to none Karolina Kowalkiewicz. It came up a split decision, and I was stunned. I don't see how any referee, any judge could have given any round but the first round to Rose. And I even when I went back and I looked at it again, the second time I watched the fight, I gave the first round to Rose to Karolina Kowalkiewicz. So when I was watching it live, I had it 2 rounds to 1. And then when I went back and watched it again, I had it 3 rounds to none. But under no scenario did I ever have it where I thought there was any question that the decision should have been Karolina Kowalkiewicz. So I was surprised that it was a split decision. But ultimately, the right person won. And it sets up, and they were talking about this right out the gate. You have one of the top Polish fighters in the world, which is Karolina Kowalkiewicz, against the strawweight champ, which is arguably pound for pound the best fighter in the world, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And so, you have a situation where, you have 2 fighters, and the thing, I was very happy when I listened to the Dana in his interview, because everyone was talking about, putting this fight on in for UFC New York. And I was screaming, no way, you got to put this in Poland. And then when they were doing the interviews, and Dana was saying he would like to put it in Poland. You know, when you look around and you look at the landscape, Poland has become one of the big areas of mixed martial arts. And you look around, there was this weekend, you had Karolina Kowalkiewicz, you had Agnieszka, who fought, which we're going to talk about. She was actually a guest on our show. Agnieszka looked amazing. You had another Polish fighter on the 201 card. This was a showcase of Polish fighters, and these guys can fight. When you look at them, you're like, maybe they're not quite ready, or maybe you'll see what happens. Every single one of those Polish fighters looked phenomenal, and this weekend, Poland is now on the map of the MMA world now. So now they're just trying to figure out. It's gonna be Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz. It's just a matter of, will it be New York? Will it be Poland? I'm pulling for Poland. I hope it's in Poland. It'd be great. I won't go to Poland to see it. I would love to go to Poland, but I don't think that's a little too far for me. But the other question that comes up is, now, with the way this fight went down for Rose, what's next for Rose? Rose just looks so much smaller compared to some of these other fighters here. And either, I don't see the UFC creating a atomweight division right now. So I think Rose needs to kind of bulk up a little bit. She needs to get a little more strength, because Rose is one of the best fighters in the strawweight division. I would put her right now, when I look at the landscape, she's definitely one of the top 2, 3, or 4 fighters in the strawweight division. I just think she needs to put on some more size. That was the biggest difference, was she wasn't strong enough to get out of those clinches, and Karolina put it on her. So Rose is definitely going to have to work on that. Now, that covers this fight, and now we're going to go into another fight that was a shocker. Holy crap, was this a shocker. Matt Brown versus Jake Ellenberger. And just a little information that I learned this right before the fight, that the UFC had decided to cut Jake Ellenberger. And that was a surprise to me. I knew Jake was having had been on a bit of a slide, but I didn't realize how much of a slide he had been on. But he was coming into this fight with a situation where he had lost literally 3 of his last 4 fights, and he was out. The UFC had made the decision that they were not going to bring him back. They were releasing him, and I was a little surprised by that. But Dana said they had made the decision they were going to release him. And he went to Dana, and he begged, and he said, "Just give me one more fight. Just give me one more fight, and I'll prove it. Just give me a chance." And they gave him a chance, and boy, did he take them! And he really made the most of this chance. One of the things I talked about in the last show was the fact that when I watched these guys train in some of the embedded videos, these guys were training like this was a title shot. This was not a normal training camp. And I understand why, because when you go back and look, Ellenberger was fighting for his UFC career. If he doesn't win this fight, he's done. And even if he wins a fight, he could be done. So he had everything on the line. He had to win in a spectacular way. That bell sounds, and the first thing he do, Jake Ellenberger launched out there, and he fired a shot, and he dropped Matt Brown right out the gate. And, I jumped out of my seat. I was just surprised. And he really jumped on him, and Matt Brown was able to get himself back together. And it looked like, when you're looking at this fight, Matt Brown started to, he got his head together. He's starting to use his reach. And instantly, I'm looking at this, and I'm like, Matt Brown just has too much range for Jake Ellenberger. Matt Brown's gonna take him apart with the range and how tough he is. and out of nowhere, there's a kick to the liver, and Matt Brown just folds in half, and this fight is over. Jake Ellenberger landed 2 of the biggest shots of the weekend. The initial shot, the right hand that dropped him, and then when Matt Brown got himself back together, he chopped him in half with a shot to the ribs, to the liver that just bent him over and just folded him up, and it was over. I'm very happy for Jake Ellenberger because now it puts him, he goes from a situation where he is done in the UFC to spectacular knockout. He puts another one of these spectacular knockouts together, gets 2 or 3 wins. He's right in the thick of things right now. You know, especially with a new title, with Tyron Woodley being the champ. Jake Ellenberger all of a sudden could actually get, one of these top-notch, top-flight guys. He gets another win. You know, Robbie Lawler's in a holding pattern. Wonder Boy could be in a holding pattern. Jake Ellenberger could actually end up getting a chance to fight one of these guys now. So how his fortunes have changed just by the fact that he pleaded his case to get one more chance, and he made the most of it. And so, I'm very happy that he actually was able to make the most of this. Matt Brown's going to have to, with the way he lost, he's going to do some crawling to get back into the mix of things. He trained so hard only to get beaten the way he did. So that we'll see what happens with Matt Brown. Also, other fights that went on in this card, because this card was just loaded. You had Rivera versus Perez, and this fight, it was a good fight, but to me, it was just Perez was just too much for Rivera, and it was very obvious that Perez was just, his movement was too much. That he had been training, and with Dominic Cruz, because he was like a kind of like a carbon copy of Dominic Cruz out there. No one quite moves like Cruz, but he was doing a good imitation of it. He was looking good with the movement, and Rivera didn't really have much answer to the movement. But somehow, I don't know how this happened, but at the end of the beginning of the third round, Rivera actually talked Perez into like, hey, none of this dancing around. Let's just go at it. And so when the bell sounded, I saw them talking to each other. And then the fight happened. When round 3 came out, these two guys just went to banging. They just started throwing punches left and right. They just went after each other, and I was amazed by that, because, in my opinion, I had this fight literally Perez 2 rounds to none. There was no reason for him to get into a situation other than pride and ego, and these guys went at it, and they went at it for a while, and then, and Rivera actually got the best of the toe-to-toe situation, but Rivera ended up knocking his own self down because he was swinging so hard that he swung himself out, and then he was just gassed. And Rivera jumped on him. He took him to the ground, and then he just pretty much beat him up the rest of the fight. And the fight ended just like that, with Rivera keeping him to the ground and just taking care of business there. Another fight that went on that was interesting. It was a good fight. Was Ryan Benoit. Ryan Benoit fought really well. It was a good fight there. He won. And then another fight that was the light heavyweight division fight, which was Ed Herman versus Nikita Krylov. And I tell you what, Herman got hit with a shot, and he was done. He was out. It was one of the best shots of the weekend. If you didn't get to see this weekend, this was one of those fights that you needed to see, because this shot, it nailed him. And Herman had no clue what, he was knocked into next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. It was over for him. Really would love to see how he's going to match up Nikita Krylov now that, he's in that light heavyweight division. There's a number of fights that he could make. He's a karate guy. He's a very strong guy. I'm looking forward to seeing him get in the ring with some of the top-notch fighters, because this guy can make some waves. And in that light heavyweight division with John Jones, who could possibly be out, there's a number of fighters where he could get in the mix and be in a title picture in a very short time. Now, looking at some of the other fights, there was another big knockout that I wanted to talk about, and that was Anthony Hamilton, which was in the heavyweight division. And Anthony Hamilton just walked across the ring, and he's just so big, so strong, and it was just the power was just too much. It was a knockout in no time flat. If you got up and got your drink, you missed this fight. It was one of those fights that was over before it started. A fight that was one of those situations. A lot of times, another fight that we want to talk about on this card. A lot of times when you're looking at a guy who comes off a loss, sometimes your management team is the most important part of your fighting career. And this is one of those situations where Ross Pearson, his management team should have stepped in and told him, don't jump into another fight. When he came off of a loss, and he was very upset about the loss, and he wanted to come back and he wanted to have a fight. So he jumped on the fight really quick, and he jumped into 201, and he got handled. And this is really, really going to put him back big time, because he jumped into a fight that he should not have been in, and he got handled, and now his career is in flux. So, all in all, just wanted to talk about this whole 201 card here. All in all, it was a card that I really wasn't that excited about when I first saw how, the people that were going to be fighting on it. They were just, mid-tier. I looked at it as more of a mid-tier card, but nothing really to get excited about. But when you sit down, you start listening to and started watching these fights, I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised at how well how great these fights were. And 201 delivered, because there was so many big knockouts, and there was just a nice submission. There was a number of upsets. If you went in there taking the favorite, you lost money. 201 delivered exactly what you wanted it to deliver. Okay, so this is going to end part 1 of our recap of the weekend. So we've already covered UFC 201 and the big upset with Tyron Woodley. On our next episode, which is going to be part 2 to this episode, we're going to touch on the Invicta card. And I wanted to give the Invicta card its own show where we talk about each of the fights. So when we come back on our next, and there will be a part 1 of this episode and part 2. So when we come back, we'll be talking about the Invicta card. Remember that you can always view us by going to www.gsmcpodcast.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can always you can download us on SoundCloud, on Google Play, and on iTunes, and also on any app that actually downloads and that has podcasts. You can also include us in your download there. So, like I said, part 2 will be up, and we'll be back. Thanks for tuning in.